On Friday, they did, in fact, speak with 49ers defensive coordinator DeMeco Ryans. And I think what was notable about the Ryans interview is that Jay Glazer then reported on Fox over the weekend that after he met with the Texans, DeMeco canceled interviews with both the Cardinals and the Colts. So DeMeco, as of now, has only spoken to the Denver Broncos and the Houston Texans. And then over the weekend, in fact, Friday night, after the Texans announced that they have spoken to DeMeco Ryans, J.J. Watt gave a strong endorsement of DeMeco Ryans as their next head coach. He said, quote, "As a rookie in Houston, I bought my first house across the street from DeMeco because if Meco thought it was the right place to live, it was the right place to live for me. Captain, leader, smart, tough, personable, crushed it as a DC. He will be a great head coach." And when J.J. Watt tweets that out, I have to believe that he's hearing things. He knows there could be some momentum building for DeMeco Ryans to be the next head coach of the Texans. And I think even though J.J.'s been away the last couple seasons, he knows he's forever going to be remembered as a Texan. I think he still does care about this organization. So I think it is significant when the best player in the history of this franchise goes out of his way to send that tweet endorsing DeMeco Ryans.
The level of support for DeMeco Ryans to end up as the Texans head coach has never been higher. It's only grown throughout this process. If there was any chance it would take a step back or level off or weaken over the course of the process, those are gone. This is as popular as DeMeco has been as a candidate in the entire process. And that's the guy that I want the Texans to hire. That's the guy I believe will lead them out of the black hole of suck that they've been in for the past few seasons. And you know who was here for one of those seasons of suck? It was J.J. Watt. He knows what was potentially needed to get this team headed in the right direction. Well, it's part of the reason J.J. Watt's not here anymore. If he thought that they could have turned things around in short order, J.J. Watt would have found himself a way to stay with the Houston Texans and finish his career with the Houston Texans. But he didn't see an avenue to success, and he moved on, and he sees DeMeco Ryans as a guy that can lead them to that avenue of success. And I don't disagree with J.J. Watt. He gets the endorsement. The interview apparently went well and went longer than some of the other interviews. And now by the way, then DeMeco's defense played really well over the weekend. As much support as there's ever been for DeMeco Ryans to be the head coach now. And I wonder if it gets to the fan base where anything but DeMeco is an upset.
Yeah, the DeMeco Ryans bandwagon is oversold at this point. I mean, it's standing room only aboard that thing right now. It feels like the vast majority of Texans fans want him to be the head coach. And you look at some of the replies to the official team account tweets, and there are Texans fans, Cody, saying DeMeco or bust right now. And it feels like it's sort of trending in that direction. I don't want to get overly excited because nothing's official at this point, but y'all brought up some of the recent happenings here. The fact that he interviewed, the fact that J.J. Watt tweeted what he tweeted, the fact that he canceled or at least postponed interviews with other teams. And then DeMeco Ryans is now the betting favorite to be the next Texans head coach in Vegas. And DraftKings Sportsbook earlier today removed the odds for the next Texans head coach. They're not even taking bets on who the next Texans head coach is going to be, and they usually only do that if they believe that it's obvious on who is going to win the bet. They don't want to lose money on taking bets right now for the Texans' next head coach. So all of those signs are pointing in the right direction if you're in favor of DeMeco Ryans being the next Texans head coach. And, man, after the display his defense put on for all of us last night, it's hard to not be all in on DeMeco. I've always been a fan of his work, but he was never quite at the very top of my list of Texans coaching candidates. But with what I saw from him last night, he's up there, man. I mean, I have zero doubt that this dude is going to be a hell of a head coach in the NFL. And more importantly, people who played in this league and people who have played under DeMeco Ryans in this league feel the exact same way. High praise from everywhere. This guy is a legit bona fide candidate, and he should be at the top of just about everybody's list right now.
So they're at 8 candidates they've interviewed. We know Ben Johnson's going back to the Lions. So we're down to 7 names that could be the Texans' next head coach. And DeMeco, Shane Steichen, and Jonathan Gannon are all still coaching and could still be coaching depending on what happens on Championship Sunday through the Super Bowl, depending on which team wins, of course. So this could be one of those things that we got to wait a little while longer to get some more clarity, but I do think we'll be able to kind of piece it together. The biggest domino that has to fall is Sean Payton.
Yeah.
Because if Sean Payton picks a job and it's Denver, then all of a sudden, DeMeco Ryans never reschedules the interviews he was supposed to have with the Cardinals and the Colts, and you can connect the dots. It's DeMeco to the Texans if they just don't hire a head coach. But Sean Payton's kind of the key here. He interviewed for the Panthers job earlier today. He's got a second scheduled interview with the Broncos this week, and he's going to be meeting with the Cardinals on Thursday. So I think Payton's the first domino to fall, and then once that happens, we'll get some clarity on some of the other names.
If DeMeco doesn't ever reschedule those other interviews and Sean Payton takes the Denver job, bing, bang, boom. It's either the 49ers or the Houston Texans for DeMeco Ryans. It's either sticking around as defensive coordinator for another year or he's taking over and helping steward the Houston Texans for the next few years as their head coach. And I do believe if Payton picked, say, the Panthers or Payton picked the Cardinals, I do believe DeMeco would seriously consider the Broncos. They have much better defensive talent. They have a quarterback, and their ownership group is, while an unknown, that's probably a benefit to the Broncos because the Texans' ownership group is unknown right now. And the criticisms certainly have been fair over the past couple of seasons. So Payton to the Broncos, if you're in the DeMeco bandwagon, if you're in the DeMeco as the head coach of the Texans being your preference, then you very much need Sean Payton to take that Denver job because the Texans have as good an argument against the Indianapolis Colts. They have a better argument against the Indianapolis Colts, in my opinion, and then they have as good an argument for what DeMeco is going to deal with against the Arizona Cardinals. Yeah. So, that, and then, of course, I guess there's the outside chance of circling back to the Panthers, but he told them no pretty early in the process. And that's never really circled back around to those. So, yeah, Texans shouldn't lose to the Colts if it turns into that, and they shouldn't lose to the Cardinals if it turns into that as well, and they want DeMeco Ryans.
Am I allowed to be an optimist? I mean, I feel like as a Texans fan that has been a waste of time trying to be optimistic, trying to be glass half full about this team in recent years. I mean, can I hope that DeMeco Ryans was blown away by the Texans, and he was so blown away that he decided he didn't want to interview with the Colts or Arizona at all? Can I think that way? Instead of thinking that, I just wanted to focus on the Cowboys a little bit more. He wants to stay in San Francisco because he realized he wasn't ready to be a head coach yet. I mean, is there any way, and it's hard to believe this after what Colin Cowherd said, Sean Payton said about the Texans on a Zoom interview earlier that week, but is there any chance that the Texans and this staff somehow figured out their ish over Zoom and blew DeMeco Ryans away to convince him that this could be the right place for him?
Optimism's the only way you get through Texans seasons. That or you're a miserable human being.
Well, I am that. Yeah. I'm trying to switch things up and be optimistic here. I mean, is that stupid, just thinking they could have crushed a Zoom interview after what we heard about the Sean Payton one?
It never made sense that he was going to talk to both of those teams the day of a game. It never made sense to me. And I saw San Francisco media questioning why that would be the case. I saw some other people speculating that this is not really standard operating procedure, and this is not really something, even with the new rules and the adjustments to when you can and can't talk to guys, it's not really something that you would expect people to do. And so when he canceled those interviews, I think that was more about just how it would look and the perception of the situation versus not wanting to talk to those teams. Because if you're DeMeco Ryans, you should talk to those teams. Yeah. You should find out if you're interested in going to those teams, and you should use those teams as leverage to make the Texans deal that much better. Because what you could find yourself getting into if you're the Houston Texans is you find yourself really, really wanting DeMeco Ryans and then having to go that extra mile, having to give DeMeco Ryans what exactly he's asking for and then some to make sure that he's your coach. Because if DeMeco's only got 2 spots and Sean Payton occupies the other one, yes, you still want him, but Jonathan Gannon's not a bad coach. Jonathan Gannon's just not as exciting as DeMeco Ryans. Yep. So you end up with Jonathan Gannon because DeMeco Ryans tried to hold you hostage and wanted all the power of the organization, and you shouldn't give that to a guy that's been a coordinator for a couple of seasons.
Yeah.
If that's what you ultimately decide to do as an organization, like, I'm not going to fault you. I would tell you this. As smart as the guy seems to be, I'd probably give him as much power as he wants in the organization.
I'll tell you what, Cody. You cannot lose out on DeMeco Ryans because of money. I mean,
yeah, that's an unacceptable outcome.
If you were willing to maybe give up a first-round pick for Sean Payton and then potentially pay him $20 to $25 million a year, you better be willing to give DeMeco what he wants, which will not even be $10 million a year, more than likely. And obviously, you don't have to trade for him either. Like, that cannot be, regardless of who the Texans' top candidate is, they cannot lose out on their top candidate because of money. We need to see an investment in this next head coach, and hopefully this ownership is serious about doing that.
I don't think they'd lose out on him over money. It could simply be how much control does he have. What if DeMeco Ryan says to the Texans, I'll be your head coach, but when it comes to drafting a defensive player, I want final say on the player. Are you comfortable giving him that say? I mean, I would, because I don't trust Nick Caserio's draft record, or I don't think it's been so spectacular that, like, I wouldn't want input from a great coach, a great defensive player in DeMeco Ryans. But if that's like a sticking point, would Nick Caserio be willing to give up that type of power?
Well, I think the question you asked, Jake, is an easy yes. Like, I want DeMeco Ryans being a huge part and probably having the final say on which defensive players the Texans draft. I'm perfectly comfortable with that. I'm not comfortable with DeMeco Ryans coming in here and saying, yeah, I'm going to need pick number 2 and number 12 to be defensive players. Like, at that point, then I'm out on DeMeco Ryans. But if Nick Caserio and DeMeco Ryans are between a defensive player on which one they would rather draft at a certain spot, I'm more than happy to let DeMeco Ryans make that call because it's his defense, and I think he should have the final say on that. But he can't just say, yeah, I don't really care about the offense. I want to address this defense and this defense only. That's the one thing that would turn me off on DeMeco Ryans at this point in the process.
That's where his leverage should come in because he knows he could just go back to the Niners. They'll be good again next year, and he's still going to be an attractive head coaching candidate a year from now, and they might like those jobs better. Who knows? So that's where I wonder, all right, they might want DeMeco Ryans, but at one point are his demands to a point where they're more comfortable just going with Gannon? And even though that might not necessarily excite the fan base, we can't sit here and say that Jonathan Gannon is not a really solid coaching candidate, especially after we all watched what the Eagles defense did to the Giants on Saturday.
And it would seem that the chances, perception-wise, when this process started, I can't speak for how that might have changed or something of that nature after an interview with DeMeco Ryans, but the perception heading into this process was it feels like Nick Caserio and Jonathan Gannon would be sort of an aligned, lockstep, work together, pretty convenient relationship for both of those guys. Now, maybe Nick Caserio was the guy with the questions about DeMeco. He gets in there Friday and gets impressed and realizes, this guy's real smart. He gives off some vibes of some of the great coaches I've talked to, and I know. And I can get along with this guy. I can work with this guy. Oh, he's going to be the face of the franchise. I don't have to do all these press conferences anymore. I don't have to do all these interviews. I can just sit back and help pick the players. Yeah. Maybe he likes that. Maybe that was part of the interview going long, is Nick figuring out he can work with DeMeco.